If you're like many of our clients, you're really thinking a lot about AI and how to use AI in your business, but you're not exactly sure what's involved or where to start. So today what I want to do is demystify some of that by diving into an example of how we are using AI in our business, using some custom workflows to give you some ideas about how you might use the same principles or ideas in your own business. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So before we dive in, we need to cover a couple of basics. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cover some key terms and components that you need to know about when you're thinking about any kind of AI implementation for your business. We're then going to show you an example from our business using some of the key elements discussed in the key terms and components section. And then finally, we'll give you some ideas about how to think about AI inside of your business. Now, this can get quite technical. So in order to try and make this as easy as possible, I want to use an example that you've probably done 1,000 times in your life, and that is ordering a pizza. Hi, I'd like to place an order for a medium pepperoni pizza and maybe a side of those garlic knots. Yep, 120 North Washington. Awesome, thanks. The first term that I want to share with you is what's called the request response cycle. Now, this is a pretty fundamental way to think about how the internet works in general, but especially when we start talking about things like AI and data integrations, it's really important that we understand what the request response cycle is. So let's imagine that you are ordering your pizza. You're making a request. And what you expect to happen at some point is that you get a pizza delivered to your door, and that is the response. You can think of a request as being sent by what's called a client to a server. So in this particular case, the client is me using my phone to place an order for a pizza. And the phone is only one way that I can make that request. I could also make that request from a web browser. I could make that request from a mobile app. Potentially, I could make that request from my smart speaker like Alexa or Siri. Now, in reality, a client that makes a request isn't necessarily the same thing as me, the person. It's in fact the machine that's making the request. This could be a browser. It could be a watch, a smartphone app, a desktop app, a smart speaker, etc. In either way, a client makes a request and expects some form of a response from a server. In our pizza example, the response is the person delivering the pizza is what we expect the response to be when I place the order and give them a credit card. Now, from a technical standpoint, we might expect the server to respond with something like what we see over here. This is some basic HTML, and this is some data that gets maybe brought back to our browser so that we can see that the order has been placed and that it's delivering to the right address with the right details of my order. But what exactly is a server? Well, you can think of a server as a machine that hosts several kinds of applications. These might be web apps, databases, process runners. In the example that we're talking about with our pizza, the server would be the pizza restaurant that houses all of the work that needs to get done in order for my pizza guy to be able to fulfill the response, right? It's not just like this just magically appears. I place the order, it goes to some restaurant, and then under the hood, some stuff happens, and eventually I get the pizza. The under the hood where some stuff happens is what your server is. Now, in reality, you can think of the inside of a server like the inside of this pizza restaurant, where there might be an area where stuff gets prepared, there's stuff that gets stored, stuff is waiting in queue, etc., etc. You can think about the individual rooms of that pizza restaurant and the individual tasks that get done in those rooms as sort of the elements of a server. Now, in reality, your server will be hosting things like web applications, databases, process runners, and all sorts of other things. So, for example, an application that's running on a server, particularly let's say a web or mobile application, might be like the cooking area where client requests come in, the guy takes the phone or takes the order, and then he turns around and gives it to the cooks, and they process the request using a series of algorithms, recipes, based on the logic or the request that the client made. The medium pizza, the garlic knots, whatever those things are. And so in this example, the application server that's running on my host machine might be analogous to the cooking area, inside of the pizzeria. You would expect that inside of a pizza restaurant that they've got something stored. They've got, for instance, probably things like spices and other, I don't know anything about cooking, spices and other sorts of dough and things like that probably are dry goods, and those are stored in one area. You might also have refrigerated goods in a different area, and then your equipment storage, like your boxes and so forth, in a different area. You can think about those areas where things are stored as a type of database where items are essentially put into a specific area for storage and retrieval whenever the request comes in. So that when my order is placed for that medium pizza, somebody goes to dry goods, they grab the things that they need, the flour or whatever it is that they've got, they go to the refrigerator area, they get the pepperoni and cheese and whatever, they go over to the application area, the information goes from the data store to the application area, the cooking area, the stuff gets cooked, and then someone goes to a different data store where they grab the boxes to then box my pizza so it can get ready to go out. Where does this leave us? So we can think about the framework for how a web works and how overall implementation works as a client making a request, expecting a response, but that response is processed by one or more host machines that inside of them are either storing information and retrieving it and also processing work via applications. So we have a request and a response, and the response is generated by the server with a bunch of stuff happening inside of the server. I place an order for a pizza, I expect a pizza, but that pizza has to get made, and the way that it gets made is through people doing work in a cooking area and using ingredients that are stored in different parts of the restaurant. So the obvious question is, well, what does this have to do with AI? Well, if you're running AI on your own servers, this would be the general kind of framework that you would use in order to make that function. So for example, you might have an AI algorithm running inside of an application or several applications on one or more servers. And essentially, when I make a request, so for instance to, ChatGPT, they've got a network of these machines that are running all sorts of algorithms and codes in order for that request to get processed. Now, if you were running your own AI inside of your own machine, this might be how you would start to set things up at a very, very high level. Now, again, this is a very, very simplified view. In reality, there might be multiple machines with multiple kinds of parameters, but I think this framework of how a pizza gets made and delivered is essentially kind of a really easy, concrete way to think about the different pieces that need to be in place in order for this to work. Now, that's not how most people are going to interact with an AI because most of us aren't writing our own algorithms and most of us aren't hiring scores of data scientists to help us figure out how to do just that. Instead, we're using external services in order to run our business processes. So what exactly does that mean? Let's talk about external services. Let's imagine that on the way to deliver my pizza, the pizza guy has to stop and get gas in his car, otherwise he's not going to make it all the way to my house. So I made the request to the pizzeria. Everything got packaged and done, needed to get done. And on the way to delivery, it turns out that response can't be completed without some external help. In this particular case, my driver now has to stop at a gas station, which is an external service from the pizzeria, in order to get some gas, which will allow him to complete the journey or complete the response in our scenario here. In reality, this is also what a lot of softwares do, and they do this via what are called APIs. So APIs are how machines talk to one another. Now, in our previous example, I showed you an example of some code that a browser might render, but the reality is that machines communicate in a different kind of code. Often it looks like this. It's called JSON. And this interchange this interchange format is what allows for machines to be able to understand universally how they're communicating with one another. So in the example of someone that is making a request to a server, well, I'm not going to be writing my own algorithms on my server. So what I might do is use an external service like OpenAI's ChatGPT, or maybe one of the Hugging Face services or some other one. I might use an external service, get back the data or the response get back the data in order to fulfill the initial client response. So in reality, this is how most of us will be interacting with many of these AI services. We'll be using our own applications or software to make requests to a server either external or internal to our organization that we expect to process information and data in order to respond back to our core application and get something done. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit more concrete and get outside of the world of pizza and see how this might look in real life in a real application. So this is an example of a workflow that we have that extracts keywords from customer responses and requests and drafts blog posts. Now, at a very high level, the way that this works is we get support tickets from customers every day, all day long. And in some cases, they might ask us some things like, hey, how do I do A, B, C, or D? We then respond to that via email, or maybe we've written a knowledge base article on how to do it. And what happens is after a little bit of time, we realize, hey, this would be a really great blog post. So why don't we go ahead and take this topic and turn it into a blog post? So what this workflow does is it takes example emails or requests that customers have given us and our responses back to them either via email or knowledge base or whatever, then sends it over to OpenAI to extract relevant keywords that we can be using for blogging. It adds those keywords to a spreadsheet. And then inside of our form, we have an opportunity to then turn that into a blog post. So if that is checked, it then will go and draft a blog post inside of Google Docs and essentially then send a workload over to our CRM and project management tool in order to let our team know that here's a blog post that we're ready to go and edit and start doing some work on. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like in real life. So here we have an example of a form inside of one of our marketing applications. We have a series of tools that we've built in order to help make our marketers' lives easier. And so the genesis of this was a question that came up, which was a customer wanted to know how to be able to set up tagging and segmenting for targeted marketing campaigns on their list. They're curious how to do that effectively, and they asked us for what advice we have for how to think about it. Now, we've answered this question a number of different ways for a number of different customers. And so what we did is we pasted in an article or elements of an article from how we've approached this in the past based on some stuff inside of our knowledge base. We have the button here that says draft blog, which is checked. And so when we click save and submit, the magic happens. Once that save and submit button is clicked, we then start that request response cycle that I talked about previously. As soon as I hit save and submit, what's going to happen is we're going to send a request to the workflow that I showed you, which is then expected to use the series of responses in order to generate the outcome and the output that we're looking for. So let's see what that looks like. Diving into our workflow, we can see that this server received data from our tool, and that data came in the form of the name, the request, and our general response, which maps to the form that we had here. So as soon as I hit save and submit, that data is going into this workflow. It sent this request into the workflow, and now we can see what that request looks like. Now, in this case, we have it visually represented as a table, but in reality, the way these machines understand it is using the JSON that I shared earlier. So now that the system has that request, it's time for the request response cycle to begin. So here we have now our initial request, which has the name, project type, client request, and all of our response, and it's concatenated there for brevity. And it's now going to be sent over to GPT or to OpenAI using the GPT model with a prompt. And that prompt is going to say, we received a insert blank here from a client that we think would be a good topic for our blog. Please give us some keywords we can target from the following. That gets translated. We received a project from a client we think would be a good topic for our blog. Please enumerate 3 to 5 keywords we could target from the following. And then here, this is the question that we grabbed from right here. This is the client request. So it's going to use that in order to now generate some keywords. And here we can see now the response, the output that came from our sending this into OpenAI. And it said, we suggest tagging, segmentation, targeted marketing campaigns, list management, and effective marketing strategies. And then it finished successfully. From there, it then sent that information. Now that information is the new request to Google Sheets. We then have a little logic here that says, if we had said we want to draft a blog, which in this case we did, it's going to go ahead and go to this workflow over here where it'll send another request over to OpenAI. And in this case, we're taking the data from before, and now we're saying, please draft an SEO-friendly blog post for us. Please use appropriate headings. If possible, a listicle post is preferred. Please base it on these keywords, where we pass in the keywords from before and this response, the response is what we provided in the initial form. So you can see down here how it parsed. So please draft an SEO-friendly blog post, base it on these keywords, and you see the set of keywords that we got from the previous request. We took that response, and now we have our additional request, which is our whole list of feedback that we gave to the customer through our knowledge base articles or whatever, and that's all basically just showing up here programmatically. What happens next is OpenAI will go ahead, what happens next is our application says, all right, if that completes successfully, go ahead and create a Google Doc. And here we can see that the Google Doc has been created with this name that we've given it. And then it says, all right, go ahead and take that content and add that content to our Google Doc. And so if I pop over to our Google Doc, I can now see this draft post here that is in a sort of list-based format as a result of the prompts that we gave it previously. Now, the final step failed because I don't have our access key set up properly, so it didn't send it directly into our CRM as it should have, but that's only because I have the access currently turned off for this example. Now, of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So now let's think a little bit through how you might use some of this in your own business. Now, before we start to share some of the ways to apply this, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of things to consider before you can do this and do it well. So first, the data quality. Garbage in, garbage out. If you give your AI bad data, it will return really poor results. So you've got to make sure you've got good data if you're going to implement any of these kinds of systems. The second thing is you've got to make sure you've got at least some decent storage. Now, whether that's in a structured database or whether that's in things like unstructured data like log files or image or media, it doesn't matter, but you do need to have this stored in any number of different ways depending on how you're intending to use your algorithms. Obviously, privacy is a big consideration, and depending on whether you're using an open source or you're using a third party thing like OpenAI, you're going to want to think about what data you're sending in and what the implications of that data are. Obviously, the kind of algorithms that you're going to use will vary based on the kinds of requests that you have. And as you're getting into this, you'll find very quickly that not only is the quality of your data important, but the quality of your prompts is just as, and in some cases, maybe even more important. And that becomes a whole new skill set that you and your team will have to learn. Other thing you'll learn is that even as your prompts get better, that maybe the algorithms themselves will need their own training. And the only way to do that is to continue to build on your models by providing more and more and more good examples of how things work. Finally, you'll have to make some decisions about whether or not you want to build or lease the software. So in many cases, you can find tools online that you can sign up for, and they'll pay, based on requests or based on, number of seats. And essentially, you don't have to build a lot of these kinds of components. In other cases, though, you might decide, hey, you know what, we want to own the infrastructure. And so we want to go ahead and use open source tools wherever possible. We want to set up our own servers in the cloud on AWS or DigitalOcean or something wherever possible so that we've got more control over the environment. With all that in mind, let's go ahead and think about how do you start to imagine or envision AI projects for your business. Let's address now the hardest question, which is how can I use AI to grow my business? Well, the answer, unfortunately, is that it's really going to be different for everyone. But here's kind of the way that we think about it as we're thinking about implementing things in our own business and in the business of many of our clients. So first, tasks that require decision-making but not continuous learning, those are generally going to be good candidates to start thinking about using AI. You can imagine, for instance, things like document handling and document processing, where you essentially train humans by giving them examples of bad work and good work and ultimately give them feedback until they get to better and better and better work. Requires them to be able to make decisions, occasionally with some nuance, but kind of once you figure out the process, you don't really need to, go out and learn how to continually get better at, document management or even some facets of customer service. That's different than, let's say, for instance, a strategic or an innovative role where you're constantly having to evolve your skill set in order to continue to add more and more value. Second framework that I would use is things that could get more efficient with a co-pilot. In the world, for instance, of marketing, there are a lot of things that you have to do in marketing that are just kind of tedious. Creating social media posts, coming up with blog ideas, things that there's other videos we've got on how to do some of these things. Like those are things where a human really will add a lot of value in the final output. But there's not really as much value in humans spending a lot of time looking at blank screens or trying to get started. So here, AI is a really wonderful co-pilot for that person to be able to do a job. The third way I would think about this is if there are tasks that require more information than a human can process, then it's probably a good candidate for AI. So let's say, for instance, I need to make a decision about whether or not we're going to extend specific terms to a customer beyond, let's say, our standard 7 or 30-day terms, depending on what that is. Well, I might need to know some things about the customer, like their credit history, the quality of the relationship we have back and forth, the kinds of projects that they're doing, and whether they're complicated or not very complicated, and so on and so forth. There might be a lot of these different pieces of information that I might have to just go as a human and go, look, this here, 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 and here, and here, in order to be able to make a decision. In reality, an AI, given the same information, could essentially come to that decision much faster. Then the human's role ends up looking to make sure that the AI, in fact, made a pretty decent decision, and they can move on to the next task much more quickly. The fourth thing that I would look at is areas where the interface is the bottleneck. So for example, for me, I don't like typing notes into our CRM, and I was becoming a bottleneck because typing notes was a problem. Instead, what I did is I started to record voice memos on my phone, and then we have an AI workflow where I can upload my memo into different Google Drive folders, and then based on which folder I upload it to, it'll automatically summarize it in different ways and attach it to different projects or accounts or other elements of our CRM so that my team can get my feedback very quickly or get my direction very, very quickly without me having to putz around with typing a lot of notes or sending a lot of emails or losing things in Slack. It's all very, very easy. I'm in the car, I fire up a note, I hit save, and then boom, it's where it needs to go. The interface is no longer the bottleneck and my team can move faster. And then finally, tasks where integrations yield more complete results. So if you find yourself in a situation where you do need to go grab information from multiple places, similar to point number 3 here, but those are in different systems, each of which have their own API, those are going to be great candidates for both integration and potentially AI automation, because now you can go and access all that information from different systems, run it through some sort of natural language processing, and then generate one or more results for the appropriate stakeholders in order to accomplish whatever the outcome is that you need to accomplish. Now, as you can see, this stuff can get pretty technical pretty quickly. So we've put together this great one-page growth map that sort of walks you through a series of steps on how you might implement and use AI inside of your ecosystem, as well as some of the biggest opportunities, challenges, and resources required at each stage of the journey. I encourage you to go ahead and click the link below and download our full AI bundle so that you have an idea of what you're looking at before you get started on any kind of project. I think in general, if your North Star is looking for tasks in your business that require decision making, but not necessarily continuous learning, that's probably the best candidate to start with when it comes to thinking about AI projects. From there, you can start to evolve it into making your AI more of a co-pilot or trying to figure out where you've got disparate data sets or disparate applications that coming together can help you make better decisions. But just starting with one or two things where you say, gosh, we spend a lot of time on X, and it doesn't seem like it should be that complicated, but we still spend a lot of time on it. Well, that's probably a good candidate for maybe your first AI project. But if you're not sure where to start, I encourage you to reach out to me or someone on my team so we can talk with you a little bit about your business and your business processes. From there, we can come up with some ways that maybe you might use AI in your business in order to help you get the productivity gains and revenue gains that many businesses that are implementing this stuff successfully are seeing, including ourselves. It is a tremendous, tremendous game changer when you start figuring out how to use these tools, and then you start finding opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And we believe that this will be transformative not only for us, but for you as well. So I encourage you to reach out. There's a link somewhere in the description below. We'd love to talk with you. Thank you again for watching. Hope you have a great day. Bye. Where is that pizza? It should really be here by now.